מבקשי בונך ומבקשי בונך יעקב סלו זה דור דור שוב מבקשי בונך מבקשי בונך מבקשי בונך יעקב סלו.
What a pretty song. We're working our way through Baruch Chait's album. It's Baruch Chait and the Jerusalem Echoes. It's an old album. I think this is from 1969 or 1970. But Baruch Chait has written so many songs that are famous in the Jewish world, including the ultra-famous Kol Haolam Kulo, The Whole World is a Narrow Bridge. This one was Yisa Bracha. How's everybody doing? I apologize that I couldn't come on at the regular time at 6 due to unforeseen circumstances, but thank God we're together now and learning. Let's light up the darkness. Who is with us on a Wednesday night as we head into the later part of the week with Shabbos on our minds and Shavuot, which begins Saturday night? Stephen in New Hampshire, Paula in Chicago, Nancy in North Carolina, Renee in Indiana, James in Annapolis, John in Sedona, Bill in mid-Missouri, Allison in North Carolina, Shandora in the Bronx, Paula, light up the darkness and rejoice. Bella in Florida, John in Maine, Barbara in Arkansas, Debbie in New Jersey. Only a few more days till we receive the Torah. Exactly. Shavuos, we celebrate receiving the Torah at Mount Sinai, the greatest day in the history of the world, and that date in the calendar has that supercharged energy of that day. If there is something that you're praying for, something that you need from God, Saturday night, Sunday, Monday, very powerful days to connect with God and to pray. Bill, praying tonight for the victims of yet another mass shooting. I was so busy this afternoon, I'm not in touch with the news. Please, God, heal this society that we live in that is producing monsters who think that the way out of their troubles is to kill a whole bunch of people. It's a sickness in our society. We've got to do our part to heal it, but really part of our work is to pray for help, because we're just not finding our own way out of this. Please, God, help us as a society. I'm so sorry to hear another one of these shootings. Please, God, comfort the families of the victims, bring the perpetrators to justice, and help those who survived heal from their wounds, including those traumatized from that experience. And we say amen. Paul in the Great Northwest, Carol in Florida, Francisco in California, Paula, love the music, Leona saying hello, Deborah from Massachusetts, Paul in Minneapolis, Miriam in Colorado. God, please, let's pull together and find our way out of this illness in our society. Aoife, welcome in Florida, and Marjorie in Georgia. All right. We really got to do what we can right now. What we can do is learn. And may the merit of our learning accrue to our nation that needs more merit. That is for sure. All right. Where are we? We're on page, today's daf is Pei Vav. This is page 86 here in Tractate Yevamos. We're going to start it at the bottom of page 85. This is Yevamos, the 14th tractate of the Talmud, the laws of levirate marriage. We are in chapter 9, today opening with Mishna number 2. Here's Mishna number 2. If there is an Israelite woman, right, so meaning the daughter of a Yisroel, right, so there are these three classifications of Jews. a priest, right, who are the descendants of Aaron, Moses' brother. The Levites, who are the descendants of Levi, right, the third son of Jacob. And then Moses was one of the Levites, the Levite tribe. And I'm a Levite. My sons are Levites. And so we, have this special responsibility to take care of the tabernacle in the wilderness and the temple. We're not priests who serve in the temple, but the Levites are sort of themselves consecrated to the service of God. And so we receive a tithe from other Jews, not now, but when the temple is standing. The teruma, that first 2% of produce, goes to the priests. The priests are Levites also, and that's actually going to have some bearing on what we learned tonight. But then the next 10% of the produce goes to the Levites. Why? Because all the other tribes received a portion in the land. The Levites did not. So they receive a portion of the produce from the other tribes so that they are free to take care of what God needs from us taken care of. And then everybody else who's a Jew, all the other Yisraelim, right? The rest of Israel, the other 11 tribes, as it were. And so today we've been talking a lot about what happens when a woman marries a priest and now she's qualified to eat teruma, the food consecrated for priests that only priests and their families can eat. What happens when that marriage breaks up, the priest dies, or they get a divorce, she returns to her father's house. Now we're also going to be talking about the privilege of the Levites to receive the tithe. Now the tithe is set apart from the produce in the tithing process, but whereas teruma can only be eaten by priests, because it's consecrated food that only priests who have the holiness of priests can eat that, tithes are set apart for the sustenance of the Levites, since they don't have their own land, they don't get fields, right? The Levites settled in the cities and received homes in the cities. But the food that was given to the Levites to sustain them is not in itself holy food. So a Yisroel can eat the tithe that's given to the Levites, whereas a Yisroel or a Levite cannot eat the teruma that is set aside for the priests only. And now we're going to see why we're studying this in Tractate Yevamos, which are the laws of levirate marriage. And generally speaking, we've been talking quite a bit about marriage and what happens, how somebody's status changes and what privileges they receive when they marry, what obligations accrue to them when they get married. So now we see how somebody's status is affected by marrying a Levite, or when a Levite woman marries, out of the Levite tribe or into the priesthood. So here we go. So if there's an Israelite woman and she's betrothed to a priest or pregnant from a priest and he died. Right now, an Israelite woman, meaning the daughter of Yisroel, when she marries a priest, now she can eat teruma. But if she's only betrothed to him, can she eat teruma? If she was impregnated, right? She became pregnant by a priest, but they're not married yet. They're not technically married yet. Can she eat the teruma or not? Right? So this Israelite woman betrothed to a priest or pregnant from a priest, and he died. And also a widow awaiting her Yavam, who is a priest. Right? So this means she was married to a priest, but possibly he was disqualified and he couldn't eat teruma. But now she is a widow awaiting yibum with her brother-in-law, the brother of her priest husband who died, so who's also a priest. So she's now in that state where she has the levirate bond, right? She hasn't performed yibum, so she's not married to her yavam yet. She just has that levirate bond, which is either they're going to perform chalitza or they're going to perform yibum. And similarly, the daughter of a priest who is betrothed, pregnant from, or a widow awaiting for her yavam, who is an Israelite. So she was the daughter of a priest, but now she's, sort of part of the way to leaving her father's household, but hasn't completely, right? The daughter of a priest can eat teruma in her father's household. When she marries a man who is a Yisroel, she can no longer eat teruma. Well, what if she hasn't totally left her father's household? She's betrothed to the Yisroel, or she's pregnant by the Yisroel, or she was married to a Yisroel who died. She would return to her father's household after she performs chalitza with his brother, if there was a yibum situation, but they haven't done that yet. So now they just have that levirate bond, and they haven't decided yet whether it's going to be chalitza or yibum. In all of these situations, she may not eat teruma. This partial bond that she has with a priest because she's betrothed to him or she's pregnant with him is not marriage to him, so it doesn't qualify her to eat teruma. On the other hand, if she was living in her father's house, she could eat teruma. Becoming pregnant by or betrothed to a Yisroel, even though in the reverse situation it wouldn't qualify her to eat teruma, in this direction it's enough to pull her out of her father's household. Either she's still living in her father's household, but she may no longer eat teruma. Right, so it's enough to disqualify her from eating teruma, but it's not enough to qualify her to eat teruma. Likewise, if there is an Israelite woman betrothed to a Levite or pregnant from a Levite, and a widow awaiting her Yavam who is a Levite, and similarly the daughter of a Levite who is betrothed, pregnant from, or a widow waiting for her Yavam who is an Israelite, she may not partake of tithes. Now, the Gemara discussion of this is going to say, wait a minute, what are you talking about? Tithes, right? The first tithe that's set aside for the Levite is not consecrated food. You can't eat produce until it is tithed, right? Until it is tithed, no one can eat it. It's a sin to eat untithed produce. But once the tithe is set aside and given to the Levite, he can eat it, and he can give it to a Yisroel to eat also. It's not that only Levites can eat the tithe. It's that the tithe must be given to a Levite. Then it becomes his property, but anyone can eat of it, right? Even a Yisroel. Whereas when teruma is given to a priest, it also becomes the priest's property, but only priests can eat of it, and only when they are in a state of purity and the teruma is in a state of purity. The Levite's tithe can be eaten by Yisroel, and it doesn't have to be eaten in a state of purity. It does not have inherent sanctity in itself. So when we make this sort of blanket statement about the daughter of a Levite who now is betrothed to a Yisroel, and it says now she may not partake of tithes, it's a strange thing for the Mishnah to say, because anybody can eat tithes. What they're saying is she's no longer qualified to receive the tithe as a Levite, or to make designation of where that tithe is going to go, which is the privilege of a Levite. But we'll clarify that more when we get out of the Mishnah. Now, second paragraph of our Mishnah, if there is a daughter of a Levite who's betrothed to a priest, or pregnant from a priest, or a widow awaiting her Yavam who is a priest, and similarly a daughter of a priest who is betrothed or pregnant from a Levite, or is a widow waiting for her Yavam who is a Levite, she may not partake of neither teruma nor tithes. Meaning, right, because she became betrothed to a Levite, it's the same as if she became betrothed to a Yisroel. She's no longer qualified to eat teruma in her father's house since she's the daughter of a priest. Or if she is a Levite, the daughter of a Levite, and she becomes betrothed to a priest, so when she marries the priest, she'll be able to eat teruma, but mere betrothal is not enough to qualify her to eat teruma. But it is enough to pull her out of her father's house, where she would have had the privilege to make designations about the Levite's tithe, even though she certainly could eat of it like any Yisroel could, as we will see. So the general principle that we've learned here is the law that betrothal, pregnancy, and waiting for a Yavam disqualify the daughter of a priest from eating teruma, but they do not enable an Israelite woman to partake of teruma. That's Mishnah number 2 here in chapter 9. Now the Gemara. The Mishnah states, that an Israelite woman betrothed to a Levite may not partake of tithes. And the Gemara is puzzled by this ruling. And let her even be a complete foreigner who is not a Levite. May a foreigner not partake of tithes? Now, a foreigner in this situation means not a priest and not a Levite, but in fact, even not a Jew could eat from that tithe, right? If a Levite, received tithes, that's his property now. And if he has friends who are not Jewish who are going to come to his house and eat of his food, sure, they could eat that. In contradistinction to teruma, no special sanctity pertains to tithes. They are merely the possession of the Levite. So what difference does it make then whether she is a Levite or not? And Rav Nachman said that Shmuel said, in accordance with whose opinion is our Mishnah? It is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Meir, who said that the first tithe is forbidden to foreigners, i.e. non-Levites, as it is taught in a baraisa. So this baraisa explains why our Mishnah is formulated the way that it is, but this did not end up being the halacha, right? The law did not get ruled in accordance with Rabbi Meir. This was a minority opinion. But according to Rabbi Meir's opinion, now we understand. According to Rabbi Meir, the tithes given to Levites can only be eaten by Levites in the same way that teruma can only be eaten by a priest. As it is taught in a baraisa, now we're at 86a, teruma is for a priest, and the first tithe is for a Levite. This is the statement of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah permits it, i.e. the first tithe, to a priest. Now, why wouldn't a priest be permitted to eat first tithe? First tithe is for Levites. Priests are Levites, right? The priest class, small group of people, the Kohanim, they are a subset of the Levium, right? Of the Levites. Moses and his brother Aaron were both Levites. So all priests are Levites, but they have the super special designation of being priests as well, descendants of Aaron, whereas descendants of Moses, for example, and all the other Levium are not priests. Only the descendants of Aaron are priests. Most people named Cohen, not all, but most Jewish men named Cohen are Levites. Rappaport is another name often associated with Kohanim. Kagan is another name. There's certain names that are likely to be Kohanim, but not always. And basically, you're a Cohen if your father was a Cohen and he told you that you're a Cohen. That's how you know if you're a Cohen. There's really no other way. Some people talk about DNA tests, but not really conclusive. And likewise for Levium. You're a Levi if your father was a Levi and he told you that you are a Levi. Okay, so says Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah, he permits the first tithe set aside for Levium to priests as well, as he too is from the tribe of Levi. And by the way, Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah was a Cohen. Now, the Gemara is puzzled by this last statement. It says, permits it. Now, does this prove by inference that there was one Tana that prohibits a priest from partaking of tithes? But a priest is also a Levite and cannot be considered a foreigner. Rather, say that Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah meant that one may give it even to a priest. The tithe does not have to be handed to a Levite. One may choose to give it to a priest instead. Right? You have to give teruma to a priest. You have to give tithe to a Levite, and the tithe that you're giving to a Levite, you could even give it to a priest if you so desire. It would sort of be nicer not to, since the priests already get the teruma. Be better to spread the wealth around and give it to a Levite who is not a priest. But you can give it to a priest according to this opinion. Now, the Gemara inquires, what is the reason for Rabbi Meir's opinion? Rabbi Meir said that only Levites can eat the tithe of the Levites. Why did he say that? Rav Acha, the son of Rabbi, said in the name of tradition that the verse states, Numbers 18:24, for the tithe of the children of Israel that they set apart as a teruma to the Lord, I have given to the Levites for an inheritance. Sometimes the word teruma is like the design, the defined term teruma only for Kohanim. And sometimes teruma is a more general word that just means a type of tithe. Now, from the fact that the verse calls the tithe teruma, we learn just as teruma is forbidden to foreigners, in this case meaning non-priests, so too is the first tithe forbidden to foreigners, in this case meaning non-Levites. And the Gemara asks, if so, is it true that just as with teruma, a foreigner who eats it is liable to receive punishment of death at the hand of heaven? If a non-priest eats teruma, he's liable to kares, right? Death at the hands of the heavenly court. So is he liable to receive punishment of death at the hand of heaven and to pay the additional fifth for it? So too with regard to tithes, a foreigner who eats it should be liable to receive punishment of death at the hand of heaven and to restore what he ate and add the penalty of a fifth to it. And the Gemara answers that the verse states, Leviticus 22:9, they will die through it if they profane it. And a different verse, Leviticus 22:14, states, then he shall add the fifth part thereof unto it. So a close reading of these two verses a close reading of these two verses shows that the Torah is emphasizing that the death penalty comes through it, teruma, and not through tithes, the tithe of the Levite. And that a fifth must be added to it, the teruma of the priest, but not to tithes of the Levites. Now the Gemara asks, and the rabbis who disagree with Rabbi Meir, how do they account for the comparison in the above verse? And the Gemara answers, they would say it teaches that just as the requirement to separate teruma produces the status of forbidden untithed produce, so too the requirement to separate the first tithe also produces the status of forbidden untithed produce. A farmer harvests all the grain from his field. At this point, he becomes liable to give the first 2% to a priest, the next 10% to a Levite. The next 10% in certain years is for him to use to fund his trip up to Jerusalem for the festival, the pilgrimage festivals, or in certain other years to give to the poor. Until the farmer sets aside those tithes, the teruma, the first tithe, and the second tithe, that is untithed produce, and it is a transgression to eat any of it, right? And so the rabbis who disagree with Rabbi Meir about the fact that Rabbi Meir says only Levites can eat the tithe. The other rabbis say, no, anyone can eat the tithe, but until the tithes are set aside, the teruma, the first tithe, and the second tithe, nobody can eat of that produce. And there's one additional tithe. The first tithe is set aside and given to a Levite. When the Levite receives that tithe from a Yisroel, he in turn has to tithe what he received and give 10% of it to the priest, right? And there's a beautiful teaching in that. Now, we don't do all of this tithing now that the temple is not standing, but tithing itself is something that we do, meaning we set aside 10% of all our income to give to charity, to feeding the hungry, sheltering the poor, Jewish education, etc. There are certain, kinds of charities that qualify, and you really, I've said this to you many times, you will prosper and you will make more money in your life if every time you receive income, you set aside 10% right away to give to charity. Even if you are a poor person who lives from the charity of others, you still have to tithe. That's the lesson that we learn here. The Levite receives charity. He receives the tithe of everyone else, and the Torah orders him to tithe from what he receives as a tithe to give to the priests. And that's called the teruma of the first tithe, okay, that the Levites set aside for a priest. Okay, and this is as it is taught in a Baraisa. Rabbi Yosef says, one might have thought that a person should be liable only for untithed produce from which no teruma or tithes have been separated at all. But if the great teruma has been separated, that first 2% for the priest, and the first tithe has not been separated from it, or if the first tithe was separated from it, but the second tithe was not, or even if the poor man's tithe, which is merely given to the poor and has no actual sanctity, has not been separated, from where is it derived that such produce also has the status of untithed produce? In other words, until you separate all of the necessary tithes, it's untithed produce. Similar to the teaching that, food which is 99% kosher is 100% not kosher. It's either it is kosher or is not. It either is tithed produce or it's not. You have to complete the whole tithing process, and until then, no one can eat of it. Now, the verse states, you may not eat within your gates the tithe of your grain. Deuteronomy 12:17. And below, with regard to the poor man's tithe, it states that they may eat within your gates and be satisfied. That the poor may eat within your gates and be satisfied. Deuteronomy 26:12. Just as your gates stated below is referring to the poor man's tithe, so too your gates stated here is referring to the poor man's tithe. And the merciful one states in the Torah, you may not eat, implying that it may be eaten only after separation. That's the proof text for why produce must be completely tithed, all necessary tithes separated from it, and until then, no one can eat of it. And if we had learned it only from there, I would say that it merely teaches a prohibition against partaking of untithed produce of this type. But the death penalty is not warranted. And the comparison to teruma consequently teaches us that eating this type of untithed produce is a major transgression, punishable by death at the hand of heaven. A different version of this discussion presents it in the form of a question. Isn't it the case that the law that failure to separate the first tithe creates the status of untithed produce is derived from the law that Rabbi Yosef taught? If so, there is no need for the exposition of the verse referring to tithes as teruma, and the Gemara explains, if the proof was from that source alone, I would say that it is only prohibited by a prohibition, but the death penalty is not warranted. He therefore teaches us that all the stringencies of untithed produce are in force. If anybody eats untithed produce, death at the hands of the heavenly court, and that means the first, the priestly tithe, the teruma, the first tithe, the second tithe, all of it needs to be done, and until then, it's untithed produce. Now, new subject. The Gemara asks, in what manner did you establish the Mishnah? In accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Meir, meaning our Mishnah seems to state that only a Levite can partake of the tithe of the Levites. That's not the law, but our Mishnah seems to be composed that way. But if so, say that the latter clause, the daughter of a Levite betrothed to a priest, and the daughter of a priest betrothed to a Levite, may eat neither teruma nor tithe. Here, what foreignness is there that prohibits her from partaking of the tithe? Even according to the opinion that prohibits the first tithe to foreigners, this woman is a Levite on both sides, right? If she's the daughter of a priest, she's the daughter of a priest, and every priest is a Levite. So she's a Levite from the father's side, this is the daughter of a priest. She's a Levite from the husband's side that she's betrothed to. Why are we going to put her in this in-between position where she can't partake of the tithe just because she's betrothed and not yet married? Rav Sheshes said, what is the meaning of she may not eat that the Mishnah teaches? It means not that she may not eat the tithe, but that she may not give permission to others to separate the teruma from the tithe. As long as she is merely betrothed to a Levite, she may not appoint a messenger to set aside the teruma from the tithe on behalf of the Levite, as she is not yet his wife, right? So a Levite has an obligation when he receives a tithe to then put aside 10% of that and give it to the priest. But you can only do that if you're a full-fledged Levite, right? So this woman who's betrothed to a Levite, she's not married to him yet, so she can't be the one that separates the teruma from, the special teruma, the Levite's teruma from the Levite's tithe. There's also the issue whether women can do that or not, and we're going to get to that. But here the point is, she's not yet a full-fledged Levite who can make that designation. Now the Gemara asks, is it to be concluded by inference that a married woman may give permission to separate teruma from the tithe? And the Gemara answers, yes. And isn't it taught, and you may eat it in any place, you and your households? And this teaches that an Israelite woman who married a Levite may give permission to another to separate teruma from the Levite's tithe. And the Baraisa continues to discuss this law. Do you say that she may give permission to separate teruma from the tithe? Or perhaps it is only referring to eating of the tithe? Say in response, if an Israelite woman married to a priest may partake of teruma, which is stringent, is not all the more so true for the tithe, which is much more lenient law, the law of the tithe? Consequently, there is no need to teach us this law. Rather, the verse teaches that an Israelite woman married to a Levite may give permission to another to separate teruma from the tithe. She can appoint an agent to do that for her. Mar, the son of Rabbanah, said, the Mishnah is not teaching that the daughter of a Levite who is betrothed to a priest may not partake of tithe. But rather, the Mishnah is coming to say that we do not distribute tithe to her in the granary. Now, when there were farmers harvesting their fields and they would need to set aside a tithe, okay, so one way to set aside the tithe is they have a friend who's a priest. They're going to give 2% of their produce to the friend, the priest. Boom, took care of it. Now they have 10% of all their harvest. Could be like a truckload of stuff. And they know a few Levites and they're going to give it to them. But maybe they don't know Levites. Maybe they don't have personal relationship with Levites. Maybe the only Levites, who could receive this in their region live quite far away. So they instituted, a kind of distribution system where, okay, the farmer could take his 10% of his produce that's set aside for Levites, but rather than directly giving it to a Levite, they could take it to a kind of produce bank, in this case the Granary, where it's set aside. Only Levites can receive from that granary, but then the Levites can come and receive the Levites' portion from the granary, and we don't have to have direct contact from the farmer to the Levite. Now, can a woman who's married to a Levite go to the granary and receive Levite's portion? The Gemara asks, well, this works out well according to the one who says that the reason for the decree against distributing teruma to a woman in the granary, right? So there's a priest's granary and a Levite's granary. So if we say the wife of a priest can go to the granary and just receive teruma from the granary, like why wouldn't she be able to do that? She's certainly entitled to eat it because she married into a priestly family. Or if she's the daughter of a priest, she's entitled to eat it. Why can't she go to the granary to collect on behalf of her family? So this works out well according to the one who says that the reason for the decree, they had a decree against distributing teruma to a woman at the granary. Why? The one who says that this is due to the prohibition against a woman being alone with a strange man in the granary, right? The sages were very concerned about creating situations where women are going to be secluded with men who are not their husbands, and men secluded with women who are not their wives. They don't want that, right? They don't want that. So the granary is a situation where, they're going to end up like in the anteroom of the granary, where you could have, a woman married to a priest now alone with the agent in charge of distributing teruma at the granary. So is that the reason? Women can't pick up teruma at the granary. One sage says the reason for that is so she should not be secluded with a man at the granary. But other sages give a different reason for the decree against women going alone to the granary. One says because she shouldn't be alone with him. Because that's a secluded place. And this concern applies equally to the case here. But according to the one who says that the sages prohibited the practice of women going alone to the granary due to the concern that the woman might be a divorcee who is no longer entitled to teruma. This concern should not apply to the daughter of a Levite. does she not partake of tithe on her own account even after she is divorced? So it's like they didn't have, teruma passports, right? There wasn't an app that proves you're entitled to teruma. Now, you might ask, well, if a priest shows up at the granary, he's saying, I'm a priest, give me teruma. I mean, he's believed. Why wouldn't we believe a woman who says, well, I'm the wife of a priest or I'm the daughter of a priest, give me teruma? But I guess what's different is one who was born a priest will always be a priest. A woman who marries a priest or the daughter of a priest, her status can change, right? If she marries a priest and then they're divorced, she's thought of as the wife of a priest, but actually she's no longer entitled to teruma once they're divorced. Or the daughter of a priest, she's thought of as one entitled to teruma because her dad is a priest, but when she marries a Yisroel, she can no longer eat teruma. So because her status changes, that perhaps is the reason why they said women can't go alone to pick up teruma at the granary. So according to the one who says that the sages prohibited this practice due to the concern that she might be a divorcee who is no longer entitled to teruma, well, then this concern should not apply to the daughter of a Levite. Does she not partake of tithe on her own account even after she is divorced, right? So a Levite is a Levite. Even if she's divorced, she can still eat from that tithe. Now, the Gemara refutes this argument. Well, according to your reasoning that rejects the explanation of Mar, the son of Rabbana, with regard to the daughter of a Levite, does a divorcee who is the daughter of a priest not partake of teruma? Why should the daughter of a priest married to a priest not receive teruma in the granary? When she divorces her husband, the priest, she returns to her father's household, and he's also a priest. So the fact that she's a divorcee is irrelevant. She could eat teruma when she was married, and she can eat teruma after. That's a special circumstance of a woman who is both the daughter of a priest and the wife of a priest. But it would discredit this particular explanation. Rather, this is a rabbinic decree that was enacted primarily due to a priest's divorcee who is the daughter of a non-priest, as she may no longer partake of teruma after her divorce. And they also applied this decree to the daughter of a priest divorced from a priest. So they don't want to make distinctions. Okay, most women who are the divorcee of a priest aren't also the daughter of a priest, and they don't want to make all these distinctions. So the fact is, even though in that unusual woman who's both the daughter of a priest and the wife of a priest, we're not going to make a separate law for her. The fact is, they're concerned that she could be a divorcee, no longer qualified to eat teruma, and so that is one explanation for why women were not allowed to go to the granary and say, give me teruma. The Gemara raises a difficulty. If so, why specifically one who was betrothed? The same would hold true even for a married woman as well. And the Gemara answers, there's no difference between them in this regard. But since the Tana of the Mishna taught in the first clause, betrothed, he also taught in the latter clause, betrothed, although the law in the latter clause does not apply exclusively to betrothed women. New subject. The sages taught, teruma is given to a priest, and the first tithe is given only to a Levite. This is the statement of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah says, now we're on 86b, and the B side is shorter than the A side. The first tithe is given to a priest. Now the Gemara is puzzled. To a priest and not to a Levite? But the Torah expressly states that the first tithe is for the Levites. And the Gemara answers, say he means it can also be given to a priest. The Gemara clarifies, what is the reason for Rabbi Akiva's opinion? As it is written, Numbers 18:26, you shall speak to the Levites, and you shall say to them. Clearly, the verse speaks of Levites, not priests. And the other Tana, Rabbi Eliezer, maintains, in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, as Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi said, in 24 places in the Bible, priests are called Levites. And this is one of those verses. And the priests, the Levites, the sons of Tzadok, which we read in Ezekiel 44:15. Now, Rabbi Akiva replies, here you cannot say the verse is referring to priests, as it is written, and you may eat it in any place, from which we learn that the tithe is given to one who can eat it in any place. This excludes a priest who cannot eat it in a cemetery, as he is prohibited from entering the place. Consequently, the verse cannot be referring to priests, And that's why Rabbi Akiva says, teruma, you give to a priest, tithe, you give to a Levite. Not, you could give it to a Levite or a priest. Rabbi Akiva is saying, no, you give teruma to a priest and you give the first tithe to a Levite. Period. That's Rabbi Akiva's opinion, and this is why he says that. And the other sage, Rabbi Eliezer, how does he respond to this claim? Rabbi Eliezer says, well, you give teruma only to a priest, but the tithe, the first tithe, you could give it to a priest or a Levite. Rabbi Eliezer would say, that verse that he may eat it, you may eat it in any place, he may eat it anywhere that he wishes, that is, in any city. It does not require the wall of Jerusalem like the second tithe. Right? The second tithe you can only eat in Jerusalem in the years that the second tithe is to fund your trip up to Jerusalem for the pilgrimage festivals. And so we distinguish the second tithe from the first tithe in that sense. You could eat it in any city, but we shouldn't learn out from it that it's going to exclude priests who cannot eat it in a cemetery. And we further learn from here that if he eats it in a state of bodily impurity, he is not flogged. Consequently, we can say that the tithe may be eaten by priests in any place. It doesn't have to be eaten in a state of sanctity, in a state of purity, not sanctity, in a state of purity like teruma. Teruma, if you're tameh, you can't eat it. If you're tahor, you can eat it. If you're a priest and you're tahor, and the teruma is tahor, ritually pure, then you could eat it. But the first tithe, a priest could eat it, a Levite could eat it, and Yisroel could eat it. If it was tameh or tahor, they could all still eat it. Now, new subject. I'm sorry. Now, the Gemara relates there was a certain garden. Now, this is a colorful little story. There was a certain garden from which Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, who was himself a priest, would take the first tithe in accordance with his opinion that priests are also entitled to the tithe of the Levite. And Rabbi Akiva went and he closed up the garden and he changed its entrance so that it would be facing toward the cemetery, to prevent Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah from entering the garden. And Rabbi Elazar said in the form of a lighthearted exaggeration, Akiva, a former shepherd, comes with his satchel, but I have to live. From where will I receive my livelihood if I cannot claim the first tithe? Rabbi Elazar was actually a very wealthy man, so he's a little bit joking here. He did not need the produce from this garden. However, his point was that Rabbi Akiva acted in order to stop him from receiving something that he felt was rightfully his. Rabbi Akiva felt, teruma, you give to a priest. First tithe, you give it to a Levite and not to a priest. But Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah held like, I think Rabbi Eliezer, who also held that way, that you could give it to a priest or to a Levite. Since there was a garden from which a first tithe was taken, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah felt entitled to go in and take the Levite's portion because he was also a Levite as a priest. Rabbi Akiva said, you shouldn't do that. You shouldn't do that. So he made it impossible for Elazar ben Azariah to enter that garden because he'd have to walk through a cemetery to get there. They were being a little bit lighthearted with each other, but they were acting according to the principle that divided them as they understood it. New subject. It was stated that Amoraim, so rabbis of the Gemara, disagreed about the following question. For what reason did the sages penalize the Levites with regard to their tithe by declaring that it may be given to priests as well? Rabbi Yonasan and the elders who were with him disagree with regard to this matter. Right? They disagree on what is the reason that the sages decreed that priests can receive the tithe of the Levite, right? In contradiction of Rabbi Akiva's position. A priest may receive the Levite's tithe. Anyone may eat it, but only a Levite or a priest may receive it as his possession. So why did the sages penalize the Levites in this way? And Rabbi Yonasan and the elders disagree on the reason. One of them said it was because they did not ascend, meaning at the time of the end of the Babylonian exile, right? At the end of the first temple period, the first temple is destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar, or the Jews go into exile in Babylonia. After 70 years, they come back to Israel. Not all of the Jews, but enough to reestablish the Jewish community and to build the second temple. Who are they led by? Ezra. Ezra noticed that when the people were coming with him, right, it was kind of like this, this subgroup of the Jewish people. Many of the Jews, I don't know if it was the majority or not, stayed in Bavel. But enough Jews came to reestablish, the Jewish nation in Israel and build the second temple at a lower spiritual level than the nation had been in the first temple period, but enough. But one thing that Ezra noticed is that the Levites did not leave Bavel, did not leave Babylonia, and come back with this, group of people who returned to Israel to reestablish the second temple. And he was not happy about that, right? So the one said it was because the Levites did not ascend, i.e. immigrate to the land of Israel in the days of Ezra. And the other one said, why did the sages penalize the Levites? That they said that the tithe of the Levites could also be given to priests. They said it was not a penalty, but rather they gave first tithe to priests so that they could rely on it during the days of their impurity. A priest receives teruma, but teruma has to be eaten in a state of purity. Both the priest and the teruma must be in a state of purity. So if he's impure or the teruma becomes impure, he can't eat. This way, if he can receive first tithe like any other Levite, and a priest is a Levite in that sense, he'll be certain to have food to eat. Now the Gemara, and we're almost done, so if you have questions or comments, get them in. The Gemara asks, granted, according to the one who says it was because they did not ascend, that the Levites did not ascend, that's why they were penalized. We can understand that due to this reason, they penalized the Levites by forcing them to share their tithe with the priests. But according to the one who says it was done so that the priests could rely on it during their days of impurity, should we penalize the Levites for the benefit of priests? If we're concerned that priests aren't going to have enough to eat during their days of impurity, why do we take that portion of food to sustain the priest from the Levites? Why not take it from the general population? Rather, everyone agrees that it was a penalty for the fact that the Levites did not ascend in the days of Ezra. And what they actually disagree about is this. One sage holds that the penalty is that the tithe must be given to the poor. And one sage holds that the priests are classified as poor in the days of their impurity. Now, the Gemara asks, granted, according to the one who says that the penalty imposed on the Levites is that the tithe must be given to the poor, due to the reason Rabbi Akiva, and it's due to that reason that Rabbi Akiva changed the garden entrance so that it would be facing a cemetery, so that Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah couldn't get in there. Why did Rabbi Akiva feel like he could do that? Because Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah was rich. He didn't need the produce from that garden. And so Rabbi Akiva was saying to him, listen, this tithe, the Levites' tithe, that the sages penalized the Levites and said it's going to be shared with other people. Shared with who? With a poor priest, not with a rich priest like you. But according to the one who says that the tithe was given to the priests, why did he change the entrance? Why did Akiva change the entrance so that it would be toward the cemetery? And the Gemara answers, this is what he said to him, i.e. this is what he meant. If you come to receive the tithe by virtue of the penalty imposed on the Levites, well, then you may have it. But if you come by the standard law of distribution, demanding your share with the Levites, well, then you may not have the tithe. If the owner of the garden chooses to give it to you, you may accept it, but you may not take it for yourself. A whole other reasoning why Akiva was saying to Elazar, you can't enter that garden, just take the 10%. You have to wait for it to be given to you by the owner of the garden. Now, the Gemara asks with regard to the penalty imposed on Levites, and from where do we derive that the Levites did not ascend in the days of Ezra? Well, how do we know that? It seems like a big accusation to level at the Levites that they didn't return to Israel when they could and help reestablish the second temple. From where do we know this? As it is written, Ezra 8:15, and I gathered them together to the river that runs to Ahava, and we encamped there for 3 days, and I viewed the people and the priests, and found there none of the sons of Levi. Ezra the scribe is talking in his book, Ezra in 8:15, says that he didn't see any Levites. Priests came, Yisroel came, but Levites didn't come. Now, with regard to this, Rav Chisda said, initially they would establish officers over the people only from the Levites, as it states, and the officers, the Levites, before you. Right, so the Levites, when they became numerous, They weren't all needed to serve in the temple, but they also acted as officers and administrators of the kingdom. But now that they establish officers only from the Israelites, as it is stated, and the officers of the many at your heads. And this indicates that officers were appointed from the many, meaning the largest group, which are ordinary Yisraelites, not the Levium. Right? So however you read that, the point is that the Levium, I guess, got comfortable in Bavel, and enough of them did not return to Israel when they could, and that made an impression on Ezra, who recorded it, and so they were penalized at the tithe of the Levites. They had to share it with the priests. That concludes our reading for today. Tomorrow we'll pick that up at the bottom of page 86 with Mishna number 3 here in chapter 9. Let's take a couple of questions. On page 86 here in Tractate Yevamos. No questions? It appears that there are no questions. Let me just scan the text because maybe Nina got called away. Here we go. A question from Sharon. Wasn't Mordechai a Cohen? There was some controversy about him not leaving Persia to return to Jerusalem to rebuild the temple. So Sharon's saying that the Purim story, the book of Esther, Mordechai was definitely a member of the Sanhedrin, and that's why he spoke 70 languages and was... Yeah?
You got to refresh.
Is there more than just Sharon's question?
Sharon's question.
Sharon, that's the only one. Yeah. Okay, yeah, very good. So yeah, it's interesting. I'm not sure. I'm not sure offhand if Mordecai was a Cohen or not. I know that he was a member of the Sanhedrin, and that's why he spoke all those languages and was able to foil the plot against Achashverosh. But I just don't know offhand if he was a Cohen or not. Okay, that's what we've got tonight. Thank you for learning together. And with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow night at the regular time.